Right there, too. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. First of all, a big thank you to Mayor Hart for caring so much about your city and having a vision to connect that to the rest of the country and the rest of the state. Thank you. Mayors love sitting down and talking about mayor stuff because mayors are at the level of government where you are compelled to solve problems no matter what the politics of it are. You'll never hear about a city shutting down its government because the two parties couldn't get along. It's not an option because we're plowing the snow and delivering water. You just find a solution. One of many reasons why this campaign is built partly on the idea that we'd be well served if we could start getting Washington to run a little more like our best run cities and towns before the reverse starts to happen. I'm thrilled to be here in Dubuque one more time, a city, a river city that reminds me of my own home, a city known for work on how local government can help build up and local communities can help build up environmental solutions, and a community that knows what's at stake in making sure that we get ahead of 21st century threats like climate change that are not only a concern on the coast, they're a concern right here in the middle of the country. And I know that you understand that. And through our visits to Dubuque, you've all made me feel more and more welcome each time. From the first visit where we were at that brewery near the river, a beautiful space. And I was still in the phase of trying to help people know how to say my name. And you all solved it for me. It's just first name Mayor, last name Pete. Seems to be what most folks are going with. Good news, a caucus is multiple choice. There's no pronunciation or spelling test. You just got to know what corner to go in, and I'm here to ask you to be in my corner on February 3rd, 52 hours from now. If you're already in my corner, I want to thank you and urge you to keep inviting everybody else you know into this process. But I know that some folks are still making up their minds. The same people that I saw in the late fall starting to let me know that I was getting somewhere, encouraging me with good reviews on our appearances, saying things like that. That appearance was so good that you're now in my top 7. In that Iowa way that you have. And now coming down to decision time. And I want to urge you to look at the historic opportunity in front of us and consider what it is that we have to do. And in particular, I'm here to make the case that what we need to do in order to govern well is the same thing it's going to take in order to win big. In other words, I'm here to ask you not to choose, not to feel like you have to choose between listening to your head and your heart, between winning and governing, between unity and boldness. I'm here to make the case that we not only can but must do all of that this time around. And to illustrate how and why, I want to begin by inviting you to form in your own mind the image that guides everything we do on this campaign. And it's the image of that first day that the sun comes up over Dubuque, and for the first time, Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. Feels good, right? That'd be a good day, right? Now, it is terribly important that we make sure that day comes about sooner rather than later. And I don't even think that's a partisan statement anymore, because I'm meeting so many Democrats, yes, but also so many independents and an awful lot of what I like to call future former Republicans who come to my event, who are very welcome to join us in bringing that day about, because we all see why there needs to be a change. And if we think about what it'll be like on that day, it also shows us the governing challenge that'll be in front of the next president. The fact that we're going to need to be ready for issues that are just different in their nature than what we were facing just a few years or a few decades ago. Climate is one example, as those once-in-a-century floods become an annual event in a way that is leaping off the pages of the science journals and into our lives. So is an economy that is changing so swiftly due to technology and automation, a tech economy, a gig economy, completely different from what anybody could have pictured just a few years ago. An international scene where we are facing threats the likes of which were not understood before, from global health security concerns coming out of China to cybersecurity and election security concerns coming out of Russia, all at a moment when the world is making plans for what they might have to do if they can't count on the United States. These are the things the next president will have to deal with, all while doing it in an environment in Washington that is more paralyzed and polarized by partisan dysfunction than we have seen in generations. And so to deal with those issues, to face those challenges that are new in kind from what we saw before, it's going to take a president ready to turn the page, move from the old habits and old mindsets that got us here, and govern for the 21st century. And that's, by happy circumstance, the exact thing we're going to need in order to win this election, too. Think about this. In the last 50 years, every time that my party has won the White House, the nominee has been somebody who was focused on the future, a new voice in national politics, and opening the door to a new generation of leadership. That's true every time that we win. And this time, we've got to make sure that we win. So, in a competition among good people who share the same values in our party, I'm asking you to consider the different approaches that are being offered. Because we have a respectful but real and meaningful difference of opinion on the right approach. Vice President Biden is making the case that this is no time to take a risk on somebody new. But I believe history has shown us that the biggest risk we could take is to go up against a new kind of opponent and a new kind of moment by falling back on the familiar. It's going to take something different. Then there's Senator Sanders, speaking of goals I think that we all share, but putting it together in a politics that feels too often like it's my way or the highway, like you've either got to choose a revolution or the status quo. There's another way. And that other way is to recognize that actually this is the moment when we have a historic American majority that agrees not just on what we're against, not just on the need for a better president, but can agree on what it is we're for. A majority ready to line up around the idea of extending health care to everybody so that there's no such thing as an uninsured American, just so long as we leave you the choice to decide when and whether you want to get on that plan we're going to create. That's new. That's historic. This is a majority that's new even compared to what President Obama had to work with 10 years ago. A moment on our hands to energize and galvanize, not polarize, the American people to do big things. But that means making sure that the 2020 election looks nothing like the 2016 election, both in our party and in November. It means reaching out to everybody. In other words, let us leave the politics of the past in the past and come together around that knowledge that what we are for also presents the opportunity to get through the division and the dysfunction that we're living with right now. Because we are for an economy where we actually, not based on the Dow Jones, but based on our lives, make sure that this is a country where everybody can afford to live, where workers are being paid more, not less, and where giant multinational corporations pay their fair share on the $billion profits they make. Regardless of how you voted in the last election, this is a country that is ready for solutions to keep each other safe, including seeing to it that the Second Amendment can no longer be twisted into an excuse to do nothing at all when it comes to common sense measures to save lives from gun violence. We are for doing something about climate change before it is too late and leading the world in making sure that the solutions work and are spread throughout the world at a moment when the folks are kind of making other plans on what to do if you can't count on the United States. Wouldn't this be a good moment for the world to see us leading on something that everyone can agree is a critical issue that affects our future? Most of us are ready to step up and support and defend organized labor in their efforts to raise wages and raise living conditions for those who work at the workplace and beyond. That's something most Americans can agree on regardless of how you voted last time. We have a consensus taking shape. Most Americans can agree that we've got to take steps now to make this into a country where your race has no bearing on your health or your wealth or your life expectancy or your relationship with law enforcement. We are ready to act not only to support Americans with disabilities, but to enlist their capabilities to help everybody in the workplace and in the communities by inviting them to work. No matter what party you're used to voting for, there is a powerful American majority right now that supports our educators as well as our kids and is ready for a Secretary of Education who believes in public education. On issue after issue after issue that affects our personal, everyday lives, we have a historic opportunity to gather together a majority where everyone belongs. One that has a place for people from all walks of life. Whether you're a conservative-leaning independent like Drew, who has no use for the current behavior of the White House, whether you're a first-generation American like Estefania, who has as much to contribute or more as anybody else, no matter your background, no matter your story, you belong in this effort that we're working to create. And if we can create that sense of belonging in this campaign, imagine what we could do with the powers of the presidency to make this country a better place to live in. So as we pull into these final days, final hours of this process, what I am struck by, what I am reflecting on are the stories of the people that I've met along the way who demonstrate by their circumstances and by their intentions what the problems and what the solutions are going to look like. You can see the problems of an economy where they tell us everything's fine based on the stock market, but more folks have to work harder and harder just to get ahead, just by talking to folks around the state of Iowa. The preschool teacher who introduced me in Webster City and said it was a good thing my event happened to be on the day that it was on, because she only gets a day off every 2 weeks, because as a preschool teacher, she's also got to work at Hy-Vee just to make ends meet. One job ought to be enough in this country. I see the face of the solutions in people like the high school student who approached me in Emmitsburg at a town hall to ask about immigration policy, ask about what was going on the border, even though I don't think she's ever been near the border. But she understood what was at stake there, and she explained why this was personal for her. She talked about what it felt like in her family when her father walked out on them a couple years earlier. So you see, she had the moral imagination to connect up her pain to the stories she's hearing about the border, because she knows exactly what the words family separation meant to her family. Now, if she can start to put herself in the shoes of a 5-year-old boy from El Salvador whose life on its surface looks nothing like hers, 1,000 miles away from where she lives, somewhere at the border in Texas, caught up in this president's cruel policies, then surely the rest of us can see to it that Washington finally has as much moral imagination as a high schooler in the middle of Iowa. We can do better. We can do so much better than we're doing as a country right now. And when we do, we'll be doing better by these people that I am encountering in this campaign, in my travels. And even the biggest, grandest, broadest issues are personal, not just local, but personal for somebody. I'm often thinking about a chance encounter that happened when I was in the airport just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Ran into somebody I had not seen since we were both in Afghanistan. Hadn't seen her since she was injured in an insider attack while we were both deployed out there. And when I saw her, ran into her, walking down the airport with her teenage son, I saw that she was wearing a T-shirt from the Wounded Warrior Project, and it said, "Some assembly required." And I asked her how she was doing. And she lifted up her knee and tapped on her prosthetic and said that the Navy had fixed her up just fine, and that she was looking forward to her next deployment. Because the people who put on this country's uniform will do whatever the United States of America asks of them. That is why it is personal that we see to it that we get a commander-in-chief who will honor our troops' service and sacrifice by making sure they will never be asked to sacrifice if there is any alternative, and will take care of them during and after their time in uniform. These are the stories and these are the stakes. What I'm seeing demonstrates what we have an opportunity to put right in this country. To come together not just around what we're against, but around what we're for, and to invite everybody to be part of that process. And not just in the crowds, but in the one-on-one conversations we're having. I can see it everywhere I go. Now, our numbers have grown a little bit since I first poked my head into diners a year ago in Iowa trying to explain how to say my name. But it's never too big of a crowd to have a conversation. So we've gathered up questions from folks as you were coming in. And to be your voice and guide this discussion, I'd like you to welcome Daniel back to the stage, who's going to moderate our conversation. And thank you for adopting our organizers across this state. I know I'm biased, but aren't they the best?
All right, our first question. What would you do to help protect workers' retirement security? From Skylar Johnston, Teamster.
Great question. Skylar, you here? Somewhere. There you are. Hello again. First of all, sending warm greetings to all our Teamsters, because a lot of our city employees back in South Bend are Teamsters and did fantastic work to keep the city in good shape. And one of the concerns that I'm hearing, especially when I'm talking to folks in the labor movement, is about the condition of our pensions, multi-employer pensions and others, that aren't being properly funded. It's why we need to make sure that we have legislation like the Butch-Lewis Act, which has been put together to make sure that there is a backstop on the funding for these pensions that are in danger. And looking to the future, when we're talking about funding these pensions, when we're talking about Social Security for that matter, We got to remember that none of these are about doing anybody a favor. This is keeping a promise. This is folks who did their part, paid in, kept their end of the bargain. We got to make sure that that bargain is made right. Somebody in Fort Dodge stood up to ask about Social Security, and he said, I don't think of it as an entitlement, I think of it as a paid endowment, because I paid into it. I don't know if that term will ever catch on, but it illustrates what we've got to do. And nowhere is that clearer than in what's going on with our pensions, public and multi-employer. So yes, we need legislation to solve it, but also we need to create that basic expectation that an employer, an organization, and a country will do right by those who have worked and expected, with every reason to expect that promise to be kept, that they can retire securely and look forward to retirement, rather than be wondering whether that retirement is going to be one where they can prosper.
I cannot read this one.
That got me all curious.
All right. You're terrific. Hold on, there's more. But the stakes are so high. Tell me why it's not. I'm so sorry. It's
It's not too big a risk?
big a risk when you were so
When you're
young.
So young. Yes, all right. John. Is John here? No? Maybe
John
wants to be
Christensen.
anonymous. All right. Well, John is saying what I think a lot of folks are thinking, so I want to speak to this directly. I understand that I'm not a traditional candidate. It's more conventional to have let's say, a senator. Although it's worth pointing out that depending on your story from before, you could be a very senior senator in America and have never in your life managed more than 100 people. It depends on the background that you've had, and my background is that of guiding a city through a transformation under some of the most difficult circumstances, bringing people together to solve problems, and working on the ground as a mayor does, because when you're a mayor, you eat what you cook. You don't debate these things just in the abstract and vote on them. You've got to actually get out there and do them, and then live with the decisions that were made. As we have confronted some of the toughest issues, from responding to natural disasters to racial and economic inequality in our community, to the need to make sure that our city just got back on its feet. And at a time like this, I get why some folks are saying, what makes you think a mayor would run for president when you're not even from one of the big global cities of the United States? But that's exactly the point. The point is to make sure that communities of every size are heard in a Washington that can't seem to connect anymore. We got to bring that problem-solving instinct to Washington. When you're a mayor, you don't get to have alternative facts. If there's a problem in the city, people can tell, and you got to go deal with it. If the numbers on the budget aren't adding up, you don't get to print City of South Bend currency. You got to figure out how to fix it. We need more of that responsibility, accountability, and reality in Washington before it's too late. Now again, we win if you're just thinking about this in terms of pure electoral strategy, nuts and bolts. Every time we've won in the last half century, it's been with a candidate who is opening that door to the new generation. And it's happening around the world. The world is bringing forth a new generation of leaders. That ought to be the sort of thing that America is leading, not playing catch up on. And I believe that's part of how we're going to deal with a president who is just fundamentally different than anything we've dealt with before. I do not believe the old playbook will work. It's time for something new.
Audrey Lockett asks, what will you do about climate change? Because I'll have to grow up in this world.
All right, good question. Audrey? There you are. Hello. Mind if I ask how old you are? 11. All right. Well, first of all, I'm impressed that you're dialed in enough to be talking about these issues. And yeah, the longer you're planning to be here, the more you have at stake in these decisions that are about to be made, right? Now, I will say, though I might seem like a geezer by your standards, that I am the youngest candidate running for president, so I kind of take this personally too in terms of my expectation that I'll be around when you are looking back on what my generation did. Look, the scientists tell us we have until 2030 to make a whole bunch of really big changes in our economy to avoid catastrophe. Now, if the scientific deadline is 2030, that means the political deadline is 2020, because if we don't elect a president who believes in climate science, we'll never make it to get those changes done. So here's what dealing with the issue looks like. It means we rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement on day one and treat that as a floor. It means we make the investments in everything from renewable energy to energy storage to new forms of transportation so that piece by piece, starting in 2025, with doubling the amount of renewables onto the grid, all the way through 2050, where by that time we are a carbon neutral society, that we act and fund in order to make sure that we have that kind of research. It also means making sure everybody feels like they're part of this. America does better when we have a national project. From making the world safe for democracy to landing on the moon. It brings out the best in us. Climate has to be one of those national projects. And it's nice when a national project comes along that doesn't even involve fighting other people to pull us together and mobilize this nation. But everybody's got to be part of it. I need American farmers to be part of it, and that's why we're going to invest in new farming techniques that can take carbon out of the atmosphere. I need industrial workers to be part of it. When you hear green jobs, don't just picture folks rappelling off windmills. There's some cool futuristic jobs happening like that, but I'm talking about we're going to need union electrical workers and carpenters and glaziers and insulators to make sure our buildings are retrofit. We estimate we're going to create 3 million net new jobs by doing this. I need young people to be a big part of the solution. So one of the things I'm proposing is a national service program, 1 million paid voluntary national service opportunities a year, and a big part of that is a climate corps. Is that something you'd be open to maybe serving in if you had a chance to spend a year volunteering and being part of that? You'd be up for it, right? Well, so would a lot of people, so you can be part of it. And the last piece, again, is making sure that we're leading the world in doing something about it. Remember, only 1/5 of the emissions are coming from the US. So we can't do it alone, but the world can't do it without us because we're the biggest economy. And what that means is we're going to have to launch an era of global climate diplomacy. And when we do, at a moment when our credibility as a country is hanging by a thread, it will be a good thing for the world to see us leading on something everybody understands to be so important.
What will you do if Mitch McConnell blocks your Supreme Court nominee?
Good old Mitch McConnell. Well, first of all, the filibuster has outlived its usefulness, and I think it needs to go. We're seeing a lot of bad faith obstruction in this Senate GOP. Remember in 2016 when he said you could never schedule a vote on a Supreme Court nominee during an election year? And then he said, actually, if a seat opened up in 2020, he'd go ahead and totally schedule a vote. They're not even pretending. I pride myself on working across the aisle in good faith with people from the other party whenever possible, but if there's no good faith, that's when you need a plan B. Here's the good news. Most Americans agree with the things that we're talking about doing, even in conservative states. Most Americans support the ideas around raising wages, paid family leave, acting on climate, doing something about guns, fixing immigration. And when it comes to the appointments that we need to make who have common sense on the Supreme Court, that's something most Americans can agree with too, even in conservative states. Most Americans, for example, have an understanding of American freedom that includes the idea that government ought to remain out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices ought to be. So we're going to have that conversation. And I will not hesitate to use the big blue and white airplane that goes with the Oval Office, that the current president seems to use mostly for the purpose of traveling among golf courses with his name on them. I don't even golf, so I won't be doing much on that front. But what I will do is travel right into the backyard of someone from the Senate who is getting in the way, not just of me, but of what their own voters expect of them, and compel them to explain why it is that they are defying not only the White House, but their own constituents. I find that that's got the best chance of reuniting some of these Senate members with their conscience. But like I said, that's Plan B. Plan A is to have a nominee from the Midwest, from the middle class, a veteran, comfortable talking to people from all political stripes, with good enough coattails that the first time I speak with Mitch McConnell will be to congratulate him on his retirement.
All right, this will be our final question. But it's good and it's topical. So,
All right, sounds good.
Micah asks, how would you deal with a pandemic?
Oh, that is topical. Micah here? There you are. Smart question. So this is, what's that? Oh, how to deal with a pandemic. How would I deal with a pandemic? Yeah. So this is part of what I'm getting at when I talk about how we're facing 21st century security threats that are different from what we're used to. Not only do we have the traditional military issues to worry about, the kinds of terrorism threats that I worked on when I was in uniform, but we have these issues like cybersecurity and election security and global health security and pandemics. Now, we got a president whose imagination about security technology relies on 17th century concepts like a big wall and a moat full of alligators. And that's not going to help whether we're talking about cyber attacks or whether we're talking about the risk of a pandemic impacting people in the United States. It's why we need to build up our local public health infrastructure. Right now, we have dangerously underfunded the county health departments, for example, that can take responsibility for vaccines, for education, and all of the steps that make a community more resilient and less vulnerable to health threats to begin with. So it's why I'm proposing that we fund local strategies and local departments to deal with it. We also need to do this at a national level. Now, astonishingly, this White House actually dismantled the office in the National Security Council responsible for coordinating when it comes to these kinds of global health security threats. It is exactly the wrong direction to move in, and when I'm president, we will reestablish and reinforce that kind of capacity in the White House National Security Council. Third, the idea that we should listen to scientists will not be a controversial idea within my administration. We're going to empower science. And lastly, just like climate or any number of other issues, this is a great example of something that we can't deal with alone because, infectious diseases do not care what country they're in. So we got to team up with the countries of the world, which means we have to be credible. Lives depend on other countries knowing that it is a good idea to coordinate and trust the United States. And when I am president, we will get to work right away rebuilding the relationships needed so that when we really have a problem, we already have a good relationship and we can call each other out. Good question. All right, that's it. One more thank you to Daniel for being your voice and guiding this conversation. And thanks to everybody who's been teaming up with our organizers. If you're one of our precinct captains or team leaders, if you could just give a wave one more time so folks know who to come up to get more involved. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being part of this. And I just want to leave you with one thought. And it is about the importance of hope. And I know why the word hope went out of style a little bit in our political vocabulary these last few years. I get it. I get what we're up against. I get the bleakness and the division and the frustration of this moment. I feel it when I'm watching the news, that sense of exhaustion that sets in and creates a temptation to switch it off. But this, of all moments, is the moment that we can't switch it off. This is a moment where we actually get to respond to those things going on in Washington that are so frustrating and discouraging. Take impeachment. You know, today, the Senate is the jury. But tomorrow, we're the jury, and we get the opportunity to send the final message on accountability and decency in Washington. And if you're here, you must be propelled by some measure of hope that makes you feel that it's worthwhile to be part of this effort, that it matters who gets their hands on the mechanisms of American government and what values are guiding those hands. That's certainly part of why I'm here. I think that there is a very good reason why they took the word hopeful, turned it into a noun. I don't know if you've noticed this. They've taken hopeful and made it into another word for candidate, right? I'm a 2020 hopeful. That's what I'm doing here. How fitting. It's fitting because running for office is an act of hope. And so is helping somebody run, so is volunteering, coming to see somebody speak, so is voting, and so is caucusing. So what I'm asking of you is to take whatever hope brought you into this room, bottle it up, and share it with anybody in your life who is more likely to respond to a word from you than to an ad from me, and tell them about why you think this is worthwhile. And if you can do that, and if enough of us do that, then Monday is going to be an extraordinary night here in Iowa. And so are you ready to make history with me on Monday night? Are you ready to do what Iowa does best? Never forget that it was Iowa, when I first set foot in this state as a volunteer for a senator from Illinois, that changed what America thought was possible in presidential politics. And then it was Iowa a couple years later that changed what I thought was possible in my own life, letting me know that as a Midwesterner, I would one day have a chance to wear this wedding ring. You did that. So let's make history one more time. Can I count on you to do that on Monday? Thank you for caring. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your support. Let's make history together and celebrate on Monday night. Thank you.